enjoyed. Well, I hope you got a lot of food for thought yesterday. I hope you got inspired. I hope you have enjoyed the evening. I want to thank you already very, very much for the energy of the debates and the questions, which I thought were very high level. I hope you haven't partied too hard yesterday evening and that you're still able to keep up the level of debate today, because that was really great. And well, I would say we start without further ado with the fourth panel of today's conference, I was saying, of this conference, which is on building societal resilience to disinformation to protect democracy. And we will see how investing in societal resilience to disinformation is essential to build, protect, and to strengthen democracy. It's about the role of media and the integrity of elections also, which is always a stress test, not only for societies, but also for the media. And it's about the importance of media literacy. We have spoken about it a lot already yesterday. Now we focus more on it. And it's also about the trust and the trust building that is necessary for functioning European democracies, for functioning democracies all over the planet. Let me start by introducing the speakers. We have Rem Silani with us, who is the executive director of the Albania Media Institute, from Albania, of course. We have connected online with us. You can't see her yet, but she should be showing up. She should be showing up. It will happen. Anyway, I will introduce her after. There she is. We have online Juliane von Rapid-Bismarck, who is the founder and CEO of Lie Detectors, a program she will introduce later on. We have Milica Kovacevic, program director at the Center for Democratic Transition in Montenegro. And we have John Hooper, the correspondent for Italy and the Vatican for The Economist. Now, as yesterday, we agreed for first round, which is not formal opening statements, but rather a bit of background on what the speakers do. So perhaps, Milica, the Center for Democratic Transition, your activities and perhaps also how they have changed since the beginning of Russia's war in Ukraine. I think you need to speak. You need to take the microphone.
Is it on? Yeah. So thank you. It's great to see many of you, and thank you for having me here. CDT is a publisher of Raskrinkavanje Me, which is Montenegrin debunking fact-checking platform that was established in 2018. And the things have changed. We switched from debunking only COVID to debunking mainly dominantly war, aggression of Russia. And
which was also because the dominant narratives had changed.
Yeah, and I'm trying to say that we do have presence of misinformation, disinformation that are permanently in the media space, but then we always have some waves that are related to important events, either globally, regionally, or locally. So whatever is interesting as information is also a great source and potential to create disinformation and fake news.
Thank you very much. I would like to switch to Juliane, who will she be visible with us all the time, or how? Juliane, a very warm welcome. Lie detectors, what do you do? And when did the need for such an organization occur?
That's a very nice question. Thank you so much, first of all, for the invitation and for the attention that you're paying to media literacy today. So Lie Detectors is an independent and journalist-led media literacy organization that I founded in 2018 after 20 years of working as a journalist myself, never having really thought that I would ever do anything other than journalism, but it really became very apparent in 2016 quite how difficult people find it to understand what the difference is between a news post and an Instagram photo. And so we're tackling this at scale. We see that young people are receiving misinformation, disinformation, and are really very, very fast and quick and fluent, dealing with apps online, but not so good at telling the difference between the validity of sources. And so we are currently working, since our founding in 2017, we are working in 5 countries, mainly in Western Europe, although we are launching in Central and Eastern Europe later this year, before the end of the year. We work with more than 250 journalists who do more than 1,300 walk-in visits into individual classrooms every year in 3 different languages. So it's really a massive logistical machine by now. But we're also increasingly training teachers directly, because we see that they are an absolutely critical component in actually embedding this digital media literacy long-term in the school curricula. We work with academia and various universities in the fields of cognitive psychology, media psychology, and media sociology to really gather the data that we get and the insights that we get from the classroom to be able to contribute that into policy debates and into the advisory roles that we have. So most recently, we were a member of the EU's expert group on digital literacy, which came out with guidelines last month for policymakers, but also for teachers, of how to actually embed this as a core literacy for all citizens in Europe. I don't know how long you want me to speak for, but I can tell you a little bit about...
Perhaps just a very, very quick follow-up. You're speaking here to a room full of media people and a stage full of media people. And it's perhaps for us, and it's perhaps a sort of professional bend we have in our minds, it's so difficult to imagine how somebody could not make the distinction between a well-researched article and a Instagram post. I was just wondering, like, how, because of course there is a sort of general feeling of lack of knowledge about this, but how concretely did this realization came to your mind that people really don't make the difference anymore?
Okay, so I'll tell you 2 things. First of all, I'll tell you what happened to me, which actually led to the founding of Lie Detectors. And then I'll show you a little graphic, which I've printed out, which will emphasize this point on a much larger scale. So when I was researching this, I was speaking to young people, and I was very struck by a conversation that I had with one particular 13-year-old who was talking to me about, at the time, questions about Syrian refugees in Germany, but also about the upcoming elections in the United States. This was in 2016, and forwarded me, a post that was, a piece of writing that was obviously written by a troll, very bad English, and it was beginning the QAnon. It was like one of the inklings of the QAnon conspiracy theory, which, as you know, paints Hillary Clinton and Democrats as murderers and pedophiles. And and when I asked her, where did you get this from? She said, I said, what is your source? And she said, my source is Instagram. And it really occurred to me how difficult that makes it for journalists to compete. When people really are not aware that there is such a thing as a news source, and they actually consider news sources to be platforms. And we've been asking this question ever since. I'm going to show you something. So there is something really important to be aware of, and that the use of information sources, or the perception of social media platforms as information sources, is changing and developing at a very, very rapid scale. So we ask every time we work with children and with teachers, what social media do you use as a source of information? And you're not going to be able to read this properly. But first of all, there's a real striking.
I think you have to switch it.
I know you can like this, but okay,
No,
right, here we go. I'm going to show it. Oh,
the
there we go, like that.
exactly,
There you go. Now we have it. Okay,
yeah.
right. So first of all, what's really interesting is that you can see that one line is adults and one line is children, right? And so you can see the kids are yellow, the teachers are green, and you can see on how many platforms the kids are really unaccompanied. See? And also, and when you look at this over time, you find out that actually the most rapidly rising sources of information are not Facebook and Twitter. They're not even Snapchat anymore. One of them is obviously TikTok. We know all about that. But the most rapidly speeding up source of information that children cite as sources for them are gaming platforms, and that is Discord, Twitch, Reblox, Fortnite. And these are places where content moderators never venture. These are encrypted spaces. These are private chat groups. These are places where children really are completely on their own and that are largely at the moment unexplored by content moderators. And let us not forget that the QAnon conspiracy theory was born on a gaming platform. And so this reinforces our view that we have got to give news gathering skills to children because they are gathering the news by themselves.
No. Thank you very much. And I think that's an important thing for everybody to keep in mind. We're all like over the age of using many of these platforms. And now we think we have understood that they are all on TikTok, while TikTok is already not the hottest thing anymore. Turning to you, Ramsey, and as an academic, when we spoke before, you taught me Albania, its links exactly to what Julian is just saying, is flooded by disinformation. And you quoted not only Russia, but also China and Western charlatans. Tell us a bit about the situation here in Albania and your research activities.
No, thank you, Olaf. Actually, not only in Albania, in the whole region. I'll quote first three polls. One is a poll done in early stages of a project called Resilience, supported by European Union. And there are two questions, among many questions. The first is what media you trust less, what source you trust less, and it was political news. Then the second question, what you follow more, and it was political news. So people follow more what they trust less. There's a problem here with the public. Second, there is a poll from BIEPAG, a think tank working in the region, and Albania has the highest level of trust on conspiracy theories. And the Balkans is a land of conspiracies in general, the highest in continent. And not to forget, in the media literacy index that our good friend Marin Lesinski does in Sofia, all our countries are in the last 10. So it seems we have a problem, a serious problem with the public who is ready to swallow fake news, propaganda, disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, and conspiracies. I use the term fake speech for them. So we used to have hate speech, and we have hate speech, but we have also fake speech. What we see in our region, in a way, I think we are in a Gramsci moment, the interregnum, which means John knows better, I think. The old is dying, the new is struggling to be born, and the monsters arrive. And the monsters, I believe, have arrived. We are drawn in confusion, let's be realistic. We feel it from terminology. Finally, I think Jasna and her group find a very good term, information manipulation, but we use the terms without really knowing what's mean. For example, in Albania, we can mention China, Russia, or Iran. China is a typical case of propaganda. Russia is a typical case of disinformation, and Iran is a typical case these days of malinformation, because Iran is not publishing things which are not true, because they hacked everything, but they are doing it for malicious reasons. And actually, we don't know what we are going to talk in Albania next week because Iran decides now what we are going to talk. So Eric Schmidt of Google used to say that internet is the first thing that humanity has created that humanity does not understand. And I have to say that we really don't understand. We know that we have a problem, but we don't know what the problem is and what the solution is. In short term, we talk for, we mentioned fact checking, which has its limits. You talked yesterday about that, I was informed. But in long term, I think the only vaccine is the media literacy, and we are now working very much on media literacy in Albania, but I think I'll talk a bit later about that.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you.
There is of course this leads directly to the whole question: how can democracy and internet actually live together? But let's keep that rather at
I don't think so.
At the back of the
Liberal
mind.
democracy
Very
and
short question.
liberal democracy and social media cannot coexist. But I'll talk a bit later. I think if the world don't change and modify, no, as it is now, no, I don't think so.
There's the structural problem, of course. John, you asked me to ask you at the first question a few general observations, because you're sitting in the first row yesterday and you've been following the debate. I think you are inspired by a lot of what has already been discussed. So I just give you the word without a concrete question.
Thank you very much indeed, Olaf. I'm here as a practitioner. I'm a working journalist. I'm the Italy and Vatican correspondent for The Economist magazine. But I think that the real reason why Jasna invited me to this conference is that I'm also the translator from Italian into English for Penguin Classics of The Adventures of Pinocchio. An iconic figure, I think, and all the more so recently. It's very interesting to see how we seem to be in the midst of Pinocchio mania. This year, there are no less than 3 Hollywood movies which have either come out or are coming out about Pinocchio and based on Carlo Collodi's novel for children written back in 1883. Now, it's a fascinating question to ask, why should Pinocchio at this moment have such popularity? And I think part of the reason is that it's not just a book about lies. In fact, Carlo Collodi never intended it to be about that. Had the book ended when he intended it to end, then Pinocchio's nose would never have grown. It's primarily a book about education. It's about getting informed and what happens to people if they don't become properly informed, which is that they get taken for a ride. And he holds up this puppet to ridicule. And I think that that actually is a very, very powerful weapon that we all ought to bear in mind when we're talking about media literacy. If you do not get yourself informed properly, other people will, and this was Collodi's message, pull your strings. And I think that if we can get that message across to people, then we are starting to make some progress towards educating people to defend themselves against this nonsense, these waves of nonsense, as somebody said yesterday, that are coming at people from the internet. Now, the scheme that Juliana talked about it sounds like an excellent way in which to make progress in this field. I think probably I'm better qualified to talk about another aspect of media literacy, which is journalistic training. And making, we cannot expect in the mainstream media for people to believe that we are any better than what they get off social media if we are not ourselves professional. But the question that I've not heard put in this conference so far is what exactly we mean by professionalism, because professionalism can mean many things. CCTV and RT are highly professional. They look good, they sound good. That alone, getting people to turn out good products, is not actually the key. There are other dimensions to it. We've got to produce products which are, first of all, appealing, yes, but which are, and this is where we have a linguistic difficulty, because in English anyway, there is no one word to describe what I'm about to describe. There is, strangely enough, in Spanish. Journalists who come from the Spanish-speaking world talk about rigor. What they mean is properly checked facts, that the product is journalistically of integrity. And I think it's that above all that we need to concentrate upon when we are training our journalists. But I do think that once those journalists go out into the profession, they also now have an extra duty, which is to convince people that what they are doing is good, and what people are trying to do who are not professional journalists is take them for a ride. And if I may just put in just one suggestion before I wind up, I think that here in the Balkans, you might think about, for example, in mainstream media, targeting some of the sites which put out this nonsense and hold them up to ridicule, show people that they are not putting out reliable information, whether by a column at the back of your weekly magazine, in a column that appears once a week in a daily newspaper, or perhaps in a particular slot in a TV or radio program, showing that this stuff is nonsense.
John, thank you very much for this reminder. I think everybody, when you mentioned Pinocchio first, had in mind, of course, the nose that was growing. But for the reminder, this is something to really to keep in mind, that it is, after all, about somebody pulling your strings, much rather than if the nose grows and more 20 centimeters plus or 2 meters or whatever. But I would like to take this aspect of professionalization, which also asks the question, of course, on whom lies the onus of solving this problem? Is it on society or is it on the media? And Milica, you're working a lot on professionalization. Perhaps you could just take it there where John left it.
I actually really want to take this road that John started, because it is actually essentially hitting the point of what we are trying to do right now. So we got after a while in a situation realizing that our hard work on fact checking is actually not reaching the audiences that we want to reach. So people are sitting and writing and exploring, and then you have basically two groups of audiences. One that is already highly prepared for reading media that reports to you, and that is media literate, would find the answers to the questions even if you don't exist. And then you have yet another group of haters, those that are threatening us and exposing to different things that normally you wouldn't like to do. But people, when they go online and when when they look to read, so when they look for news, they are not looking for what is wrong and what is false. That's not what they want to read. They want to read what's new. And we really need the partnership with mainstream media in this. So I've also heard that you talked yesterday about that Norwegian model was mentioned, where the media are trying to organize in a front to combat the disinformation and fake news. That's what we are trying in Montenegro with the support of European Union. Montenegro has traditionally very much divided media scene, extremely polarized political scene that affects functioning. We don't have functioning self-regulation and many other problems. And that's that negative side of the story. But actually on a positive side, and to the surprise of many, we easily got to the agreement with vast majority of renowned media in Montenegro. They took part in the activities and actually signed the statement of basic principles, in which they basically said, yeah, we don't want to be producers of fake news. We don't want to be labeled as disinformation. We will improve our work and practices. And yes, we want to work together with you and to communicate this with citizens. And I'm not a journalist, and for many years in this settings, I would have to apologize to journalists, like, how dare you to speak about journalism when you're not I'm a researcher, but and you know, fact checking is not some exclusive task that only fact checkers can do. Checking the facts is basic job of journalism, and I truly believe that we don't emphasize enough this part of professionalism, which is integrity, which basically differentiates you from the social media. What is different is editorial control and oversight over the content that you are publishing. And we, having in mind the situation in the country, we will be starting slowly. So Montenegrin journalists are now publishing articles. They are not ridiculing outlets, but they are, because that would be probably the next and more brave step, but they are taking the topics without naming anyone who wrote about them, but actually explaining to the citizens. So basically doing debunking, probably in more interesting ways that the fact checkers are doing, because there is more freedom. You can choose your style, whether that's op-ed or it's a TV broadcast or anything. And I think it works because I see that we are finally reaching to some audiences that don't trust us, or that are already, you know, believe that we are part of some really dark conspiracy, you know, QAnon blood drinking, Bill Gates paid attackers on everything important to them.
And this idea of more integrity for journalism, Ramsey, you just I pushed you a bit to that sentence, that democracy and the internet at least is a huge problem for coexistence. So I would take what Milica just said, or rephrase it in the way, could, with the most integrity in the world, democracy and the internet survive together?
You know, we have to be aware.
Yes.
Sorry, we have to be aware that the nature of the media ecosystem has changed. It used to be a vertical system compatible with liberal democracy, and the key word was transmit. Now it's a horizontal media ecosystem compatible with infocracy, which we don't know what it is, and the key word is share. So we are shifting from transmitting to sharing. It used to be an institutional media system, newspapers, television, radios. Now, as Paolo Mancini puts, it's desinstitutionalized. It's not institutional anymore. Is it compatible with democracy? We have to see. But what we are aware and what we see today is that in this situation we see, in one hand, increase of mistrust, or the trust is losing, and second, extreme polarization. And democracy without trust, I'm not sure that can function, can work in long term. In the Balkans, we have a very interesting cocktail of American Trumpism, Italian Berlusconism, and Central European Urbanism. You know, this is the frame. How to deal with it, I don't know. It was mentioned fact-checking, Milica mentioned fact-checking, and of course, I think few organizations, Raskrivanje in Bosnia, Istinomer in Serbia, Faktoje here do a great job. But I think it's not the magic key. You know, it's not about facts. It's about attitude towards the facts. It's not about truth. It's about attitude towards the truth. And Roger Ailes and the famous serial The Loudest Voice says, people don't want to be informed. People want to feel informed. And to feel informed, we have to go from facts and fact-checking to narratives. We need to develop narrative journalism. Somebody last week in Berlin, we were there, me and Jasna mentioned analytical journalism also. You know, can be constructive journalism, I don't know, but not only the dry facts. The dry facts are not going to save us from the fake. In long term, I believe that, you know, both have to change and to find the modus vivendi. And, you know, liberal democracy has to abandon its dogmas, but also some of its dogmas, but also I believe that social media cannot continue as it's now. So.
Thank you very much. Zooming back a little bit in time, you mentioned this three personas, let's say, characters, Trump, Berlusconi, and Orban, of whom, of course, Berlusconi has probably the most, let's say, historical depth because it goes back. His
strongest influence in Albania.
Exactly. His sort of using very, very knowingly the media reaches back to the late 80s, well, in the 90s, it really became powerful. And John, you have the privilege of having observed, well, privilege, having had the opportunity to observe Berlusconi's rise and also his use of the media. He actually owned them outrightly. Could you tell us about it a bit? It's a bit of a historical digression in this debate, but I think it's valuable input.
Yeah, I think that when the history books come to be written, Berlusconi will be seen as the founder of one of the three big threats that classic Western democracy faces at the moment, the others being Islamism and authoritarianism. The one that he represented at the beginning was an illiberal democracy. So he's always found his natural friends amongst the Erdogans of this world, the Vladimir Putins of this world, people who are elected and then go on to impose an altogether illiberal system. Now, Berlusconi himself didn't do that, and that is tribute to the strength of Italian institutions. There are moments, I think, when he did want to do that, but was held back. One of the things about Berlusconi has been the most obvious thing is, of course, his ownership of 50% of Italian television, which at the time of his rise was far more important than it is today, though it does remain surprisingly important. I think that is maybe one of the first lessons, which is that the old mainstream media, the legacy media, as they're sometimes referred to, actually do retain a considerable strength, particularly when it comes to setting the agenda. The other thing that I would note about Berlusconi, though, is not just the fact that he has owned a large part of the Italian media, but that he has used the media as an instrument of mind control. And he's done that through language. And one of the key points, I think, here I'm speaking to the other journalists in this audience, language really matters, and you must look after the way in which you express yourselves. Berlusconi began in politics by incorporating into the alliance that won the 1994 election the neo-fascist party. So he had a problem because the vast majority of Italians did not want to vote for neo-fascists. So what did he do? He described his alliance as I moderati, the moderates, and he hammered that word out all the time on his television stations. When he wasn't calling them I moderati, he referred to the alliance as a whole, not as the right, because it quite clearly was a right-wing alliance, but as the center right. Now, the remarkable thing about this is that not only do his followers uniformly, and the same goes for his allies, uniformly use those terms, the left in Italy uses exactly the same terminology now. And that shows you the power of just repeating something over and over again if you've got a big enough platform. So I think if there's a lesson to be drawn from Berlusconi's career, it is watch your language.
And fast forward to now, of course, the coalition that is governing Italy now is also called a center-right coalition. But another question, it points a bit to this idea that money can buy the world. So I'm just wondering, yesterday I mentioned Elon Musk having bought Twitter. Would you say that despite the difference in the political outlook between Berlusconi and Musk, there is a blatant difference, well, I'm personally serving you my own thoughts, in how knowingly Berlusconi did use the media of his time and how sort of improvisingly Elon Musk seems to be using the media that is in his power now?
At the moment, yes. I think that we can't quite see if there is a pattern yet to the way that he thinks. What we do know, though, is that his ideas contain strands which in the present context are much more dangerous than they would be in other contexts. Libertarianism, the idea of total free, unregulated, unchecked speech was not really a great threat 20, 30 years ago, but it has become a much greater threat as a result of the internet, which brings us back, in fact, to Remzi's point earlier on, as to whether the internet and democracy can really coexist. Right now, it's on a knife edge.
Remzi, perhaps very shortly, because we're speaking about Italy, and Italy has, of course, a relevance for the region, but very, very concretely for the country we're in here, for Albania. Could you develop a bit, because you nodded also when John was speaking about Berlusconi, like how this trickles down towards Albania?
Look, it used to be a restaurant Berlusconi in Tirana. And I think this tells a lot. Italy is a country with very strong influence here. I am more afraid of, let's say, the illness is coming from Italy rather than illness is coming from Turkey to Albania, for the simple reason that the influence of Italy, it's much stronger. It's culturally, first of all, but it's also Mediterranean mindset. You know, we fit perfectly in the Mediterranean media system, which is polarized and extreme polarization and state interference. From that point of view, you know, I consider Berlusconi phenomenon more problematic rather than some other illnesses coming from the East here.
Thank you very much. Switching a bit to sort of things we can do and the outlook. Juliane, you also work on, and it's the keyword, of course, media literacy, which has already been named. You work on guidelines, media literacy guidelines for the European Union. Could you tell us a bit about these?
Yes, certainly. But before I do, I would really like to say something about the discussion that we've just been having, because if we consider resilience, we should really be considering resilience not only to disinformation, but more fundamentally to polarization. And that's what I think what we've been talking about. And there are things here that are structural within the social media framework, but also societal. And if you imagine, we used to always walk to a newsstand. I am sure you remember walking to a newsstand and picking out your newspaper of the day. And we had this vast array of newspapers. There were always tabloids. There were always alien landings on Mars or whatever it was. And we had the choice. And we could see very clearly, the different formats of the newspaper, and we could decide whether we wanted to entertain ourselves with a tabloid or actually go for a very serious news source. The problem at the moment is that the preference algorithms of the social media platforms are not allowing us to see this array of stories, first of all, and shoving us further and further down the rabbit hole of either the type of media that John Hooper was just describing, Berlusconi's media, for example, Breitbart, you name it. But we also need to train the reader's eyes to recognize what is good news and what is not solid news. And I don't necessarily think that that is a matter of shaming and calling out the bad media, but actually of journalism explaining ourselves, because I think we have to remember that perhaps there was a watershed moment with the financial crisis when journalism let society down. They didn't spot it, and it created an awful lot of pain for an awful lot of people. And that coincided with the rise of social media and blogs and alternative sources of information and the journalism business model crisis. And journalism has not recovered. One way in which we can make ourselves, well, there are several ways in which we can make ourselves relevant, and then I'll get to the guidelines in a second, but I think it's important to say this. One of the things that we do when we go into classrooms, we train our journalists to talk about not only disinformation, what is it? What words do children use for it? Let's make sure we're using their words for it and not imposing adult words or even journalist words on a debate that is important to every citizen. What is disinformation? Why is it there? Why should we care? And what can we do about it? We need to be giving concrete tools. We can't only be lamenting that it's there. We need to actually be giving out these very basic journalistic tools, which are not that difficult to learn. And on the other hand, and this is why we work with journalists have got to come clean and say that they don't always get it right. Because if we start saying this is good media and this is bad media, we're just putting ourselves into glass houses. Everyone in this room who's a journalist has made a mistake. Everyone probably has had to issue a correction. And the difference between a blog and a professional news source is that there are correction systems in place. And a lot of people don't know that. So our journalists always have to talk about a time when they tried to reach their high standards. And John Hooper was asking, what is professional journalism? Ours all adhere to the guidelines of the International Federation of Journalists and also the Ethical Journalism Network, which spell these out very clearly. They have to show, first of all, this is what I'm trying to do, and this is how I can sometimes fail. And it is extremely important for citizens to understand how journalistic errors occur, that they can occur, and that there is a difference between deliberate disinformation that's being put online and journalism that might not always be getting it right, but works with a fundamental remit of informing the public. And I think that's something that not a lot of people talk about. And I think it's something that we really should be talking about. And journalists are uniquely placed to describe this. Now going to if you'd like me to talk about the guidelines, I think the guidelines are a really wonderful indication of Europe's direction of travel. So the guidelines that Olaf mentioned, this is a year-long process that we were very lucky as lie detectors to be working on with a group of 23 other experts in media literacy, academia, etc. And what we came up with was an EU, two very large documents. One is 100 pages, one is 40 pages. The 100-page document is a set of recommendations, and this is really the emerging expert consensus on how societies in Europe can embed digital media literacy as a core competence among all citizens. And the second document is very practical guidelines for teachers and how they can do it day to day. And I'm just going to give you a very quick, I just want to pull it up so that I'm not missing anything, but the very broad lines are, there's really an emerging agreement that digital literacy really belongs into the core of all teaching. It should be treated not just in the IT room or in the politics lesson, but it is something that belongs into every bit of teaching, just like reading and writing.
May I just very quickly, just one point. Media literacy, digital literacy, is that the same in this way, or are these two different concepts?
That's a very good question. So if we're talking in a pan-European context, we've got to be careful with the words that we use, and we've got to make some concessions and some compromises. So normally you would talk about this as media literacy. However, in some countries within the EU, if you say media literacy, the governments in place will hear this as opposition work, right? Media literacy is a way to prove that the government is lying, right? And you will never get the buy-in of governments that way. You need to get the buy-in, and therefore the terminology that we were working with was digital literacy, and then more specifically digital media literacy, because we need to explore all the doors that are open. I think there's no question that the war in Ukraine has opened some doors that were previously more closed. You know, the fear of Russia has actually, you know, created some more kind of more open minds to this idea of media literacy. But in short answer to your question, we call it digital literacy because it is more universally acceptable.
Thank you very much.
On the guidelines, I'll say something, a short thing more. I think it's quite a radical thought to think that digital or media, or let's call it digital media literacy today, should rank alongside the very core skills of reading and writing and counting. You cannot become informed, you cannot learn without the ability of gauging the validity of your sources. And that should feature in the math lesson and the biology lesson, and in primary school. We've seen some fabulous projects happening for pre-literate age groups that work entirely with emojis and are extremely powerful. So this, I think, is a really interesting development. Also, interestingly, probably for this audience, is that there is a consensus that external experts will continue to play a very important role in classrooms. And this is backed up by the OECD, the Director of Education and Skill, Andreas Schleicher, who designed something called the PISA rankings, which rank schools in terms of how well they prepare their children. And this is that teachers can't lift all of this. This is a very heavy burden to lift, and also an extremely complicated subject, and also potentially risky subject to treat. If we think about the teacher who was murdered in France after he talked about Charlie Hebdo, for instance, and that experts should really, not just in vocational colleges, but across the board, play a role in informing people who are learning. And that can be journalists, that can be librarians. Obviously, you need to have independence and quality controls in place, and the conditions have to be very carefully circumscribed. But also that digital literacy, and this goes again to your question of what should it be called, needs to be considered in all of its various shapes and forms, right? So all the way from news literacy, which is more of what we do at Lie Detectors, to algorithm literacy. And there's a very, very interesting project just being created now called Crossover, which works on this cognitive psychological concept that if you know why you're receiving this information, if you know that you're being targeted by a particular set of posts or a particular direction of argument, if you know why, then you're more able to resist it. And this is what we call algorithm literacy. Also, people need to understand the business model behind. I'm almost done. It's quite long, but I'm almost done. One thing that is going to be really interesting to embed among the teaching profession, whose DNA is really not to say, I don't know, tell me something I don't know. Teachers' DNA is to say, here's what I know and I'm going to hand it to you. We really have to, in this very fast developing world, we've got to make sure that teachers feel safe and comfortable asking questions and learning together with children, because it is so quickly, so fast moving. And finally, the recommendations for the for policymakers are much more in the line of, we've got to start doing impact assessments. You know, what is success in media literacy? What is the measure of success in media literacy? When have teachers done enough? What is the equivalent of your 5 fruits and vegetables a day? You know, if this is a muscle that children need to train every day, then what are the portions that they need to be getting? We need to be securing that all of the kind of media literacy and all of that sort of training that we are transmitting is independent of party political, but also commercial interest. Let's not forget that the social media platforms have got a large interest in getting involved in this, and that we make sure that these materials are accessible to all, regardless of digital connectedness, for instance, which is an issue that we noticed during the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Juliana. Media literacy in formal education is, of course, something, despite your bleak outlook on broader societal trends, you're working also on practical solutions, actually. So,
Yeah.
Ramsey, this is like the direct bridge to your work.
I think, I'm aware that there are many media literacy initiatives in all the region, including Albania, but we realized here that it was time to shift from ad hoc, spontaneous approach to systemic approach, which means introducing it at schools, at education system. What NGOs can do, what all of us can do, it's important, but in the end of the day, it has to go to the school. And I think UNESCO has the best expertise and the mandate to do that. And thanks to a project supported by UNESCO, implemented by UNESCO, but supported by European Union. And I have to thank Kester is here. Andres, thanks again. We were able to pilot the curricula, meal curricula at 20 Albanian primary and secondary schools to train 200, to draft the curricula, first of all, to discuss it with teachers, with experts. We had a good cooperation of the Ministry of Education, especially the Agency for Curricula. And now we were able to train 240 teachers, you know. And it was I believe it was a good story. And now we are trying that next year we go national, which means we train all the trainers and then we move national. Because and we see a great interest by both teachers and kids at school. This is an important level to be addressed, primary and secondary schools. But we are addressing it at another level, which is universities. We cannot bring back to gymnasium or primary school students of today. Yeah. And we are working with an experimental, I have to say, model of media literacy in non-journalism departments, from agriculture to law, from biology to medicine. And I remember when I went to talk to the dean of biology, he said, sorry, but we are not journalism, Ramsey. We are friends in school, but why are you asking this? I said, because actually most of the fake news and disinformations are coming from your field today. Yeah, he said, good. And this has been supported by US government. So Shannon, I will not forget your support also. And another level is the wider public. There is a project called Resilience, I see Tihomir there, which is addressing kids at schools, addressing different strata of society. This is the third level, and the fourth level, which I am not going to talk about, but John mentioned it very well, is the training of journalists themselves on disinformation, on media literacy for them, in special programs. So these four levels, from primary, secondary schools to universities to wider public, which is very important, and to journalism itself, I think means addressing it, addressing the media literacy in a, how to say, in frontal way. we are very much in early stages, very much behind, but in the end of the day, now we know that, the long-term solution is investment media literacy. So thanks.
Thank you. Milica, media literacy, perhaps also informal education in Montenegro, does that already play a role?
It does, but I actually, I kind of got inspiration to mention something. I find the issue of whether coexistence of democracy and internet is possible, I find it really disturbing, and I can't leave this without commenting that and trying to say something positive about that. I mean, we will have to find a way of coexistence. The one that doesn't survive will be democracy. So the internet will survive, for sure. And on a positive note, I think that European Union is actually doing something to try to help democracy survive through the recent regulations such as Digital Services Act, Digital Market, and also through the strengthened code of conduct, code of practice against disinformation. And I know that there is a lot of criticism around these documents, and I know that many things won't work in first couple of years, and that there will be changes, but I'm certain that this is the introduction to something that means regulating the digital space and actually protecting the democracy from negative effects of disinformation. And yeah, we are doing something with media, with traditional media. Many things are done with media literacy in schools. There is a lot of education, but what technology is now providing in terms of to disinformation side is a real danger, and that should be addressed. All of our findings are showing that actually social media are the key source of disinformation. And I want to take the chance while I'm here to say something that I constantly repeat. Here we have people from the countries that are aspirants to become EU members. We would really want to see these new policies being also implemented, shared with us in the Western Balkans. I constantly say to our European guests that we want this also to be part of the of negotiation framework. For you from like big countries, we don't exist for the big tech companies, like not just Montenegro being the smallest one, but any of our countries. We have zero negotiation position, and we can't discuss, we can't, I think, even reach out to them. So the only chance for us to have some things aligned here is actually to get the support from the European Union. I also know that these things, if they succeed, and they will eventually at European level, will naturally spread around the globe, because no big tech company will be able to say, you know what, we are adhering to high standards in the EU, but you in India, you can die. But I would like to see this neighborhood of European Union involved, because if we are waiting, we will come to the situation that we can't align anymore because things are developing so fast. We already witnessed that situation with the sanctions against Russian Federation in terms of media. For the EU, for the EU countries, it was easy task. You just switch off Sputnik website and Russia Today in English or German or whatever. Yeah. For us in the Western Balkans, it means, well, seriously going to the line of limiting freedom of speech, because local media actually transmitters of the Russian propaganda. So especially like in Serbia. So that's why I just not to go too far with this. I believe that in the Western Balkans we should also we should be more involved in this and allowed to learn, because everyone is now learning. So to try to learn why everyone still is learning, and not learn about that like in 10 years time, when the world will be probably a very different place.
Thank you very much. And of course, yes, the European Union does have this effect of scale and the leverage which many other countries don't have, and the power of standard setting, which then are adopted. And there are many, many examples. John, you wanted to react to
Yeah, I
this
wanted to pick up
immediately.
on what I think was a crucial point made by Juliana earlier on, that journalists, of course, do make mistakes. We must admit to those mistakes, which we used not to do. I mean, the idea that we would correct things, I mean, there were, yes, corrections that often appear days or even weeks later down the bottom of perhaps a different page on which the error had appeared. And that now needs to become much more prominent. You know, we can't present ourselves to the public without admitting that what we do is imperfect. But having said that, I think that she went on to make an even more crucial point, which is there is a gulf of difference between honest mistakes and deliberate manipulation. And that's really what we are talking about. I think that what it comes back to is the point that I made earlier, which is that journalists now need to be more proactive. We need to be explaining more thoroughly to the public. And this is part of media literacy, I would argue, what exactly it is that we do. I was invited recently to a meeting of the American Business Circle in Rome. So a highly literate, highly educated audience. And in the course of talking about something else, I explained that when I write for The Economist, what I write passes through 7 filters before it appears in print. One of those is a fact checker, one is a lawyer, and the other are colleagues, for example, the foreign editor, the section head, etc., etc. People were astonished, utterly astonished. They have been brought up to see journalism as a reporter who types out a story and then it appears in print, because that's often the way that it's portrayed by Hollywood. One moment we have the journalist writing, and the next moment the presses are turning. We need, I think, and this is where we come back to journalists going to schools and so on, to explain to people at an early stage in their lives, it's not like that. Now, I'm not saying that all the media outlets in the Western Balkans can afford the kind of editorial structure that allows you the luxury of 7 filters. But you do check your facts. You do try to make it accurate. And that point, I think, is often missed on people who don't understand what it is that we do. And I think this proactivity is necessary because we're in an emergency. Democracy is in a crisis. If you go to Africa, for example, people don't want to become democratic. They look to China. They say that's the system that has worked out, authoritarianism. In many other places, there's a very high tolerance of, at least in theory and before it is actually imposed on them, illiberal democracy. And if I may end on a rather optimistic note, the one place that I do look at with some optimism is, strangely enough, the United States, where the midterm elections do seem to be offering some hope that people are sick of polarization. And that could give a wonderful opportunity, I think, to those such as the Danish and Norwegian speakers we heard from yesterday, talking about solution-oriented journalism and debate that is constructive. It's a straw in the wind for the moment, but perhaps those elections are telling us that some part of the tide is turning.
Well, hopefully. The 7 stages a Economist article passes through is probably for most of us here in the room, me included, for the media I've been working for in my past life, is a distant dream. This is like a very, very well-off publication, of course. I remember very well a media I've worked on to discover on air a sentence, not coming from me, but some elections back in Italy, speaking of Berlusconi as the last bulwark against populism. And I thought, wow, this is going on there. Anyway, John, I have another short question, because zooming back to what you said initially now, of admitting errors on one side, which is probably a very, very powerful tool for people to get an insight like on how we're working. When we talked before this session, you also told me about the culture that is very present in the English-speaking media, and I'm speaking about the UK and the US, both of them, which is contrasting. Could you say a few words?
Yes, again, yes, that's, I think, about giving the journalist. Here we're now speaking about the area that one of the earlier speakers yesterday said was being neglected in all of our discussions, which is straightforward news reporting, which is still the basis and the bulk of the journalism that people consume. One of the things that, and I don't know what the traditions are in the Western Balkans, one of the things that vitiates Italian journalism is the lack of a habit of holding what people say to account. In good practice in Anglo-Saxon journalism, if a politician says something, you have an obligation to see if it matches the known facts, if those facts exist. Let me give you a concrete example. At a press conference, the then Prime Minister in Italy said that Italy had Europe's best secondary education system. Now, Italy does have a very good primary education system. It has a so-so secondary education system, and that is discernible through the PISA studies. They're easily available on the OECD website. But because there is this culture of respect for the other person's view in Italian society, these statements go uncontested, unchecked by the journalist. And it's left, in fact, to fact checkers who don't, frankly, have a very big role in Italian society or media to then hold the politician to account. The result is that basically, if you're an Italian politician, you can say any nonsense that you like, and it will be faithfully reproduced in the mainstream media the following day, with nobody adding that extra paragraph that says, according to the OECD, however, blah, 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 Italy ranks 16th out of 27 for secondary education. And I think that that is a very powerful tool in the journalist's armor to always see if what the politician is saying is actually correct. And if it isn't correct, or if it's not quite correct, putting in an extra paragraph that states those facts.
Thank you very much. Until now, we have been debating, and it went a bit back and forth between like the onus on the media to do something and the onus on society building proper skills for media literacy. I was saying media resilience. We have another 15 minutes, so I would open the questions, and there was a hand immediately in the middle there, the lady with the blue jacket.
Hi, my name is Samra Luchkin and I'm coming from Sarajevo. Thank you very much for this interesting panel. And I would like to say that I have always been more concerned not over Pinocchio, but about his friends, those who made him to do evil things. So Pinocchio get educated, he got changed, but these friends remain the same. So how we reach at the end of the day, that kind of young audience that remain out of this kind of intervention that we were mentioning at this panel. And I have two more very precise questions for the panel. The first one, when you mentioned the proactive act of journalism, does it include the maybe some new forms of traditional journalists and in order to develop new approaches? Does the proactive approach include developing of these new forms in order to respond to the young and more modern audiences? And the second is, you were mentioning the 7th stage of editing of the text within the newsroom. Bearing in mind the current situation, economic situation of the newsroom, what do you think, who should and what should replace these 7 people checking the text? Thank you.
Should we start from the last one? And this is, of course, one directly to you, John.
Yes. I didn't quite catch the word that you used. You said, given the I imagine financial situation that you find yourselves in, what can you do? I think there are very few journalistic organizations in which at least one filter is not possible. So I think that even if you have that, then you are able to say to people that what has gone into the paper has been checked before it appears. Given the need for speed, however, and this has become a real problem, I think, for journalism, and I can even feel it within The Economist, that we are being dragged into a system in which there is less checking because we just don't have the time in which to do it. This is one of the other pressures that we've not really spoken about, exerted by the internet. The fact that we have to get everything up there quickly. And that's where we also have a big disadvantage when compared to the manipulators, because they can dream things up a great deal faster than we can report things. So I think that we have to do that, but we also have to then, I think, look at the other side, which is the admission of mistakes. If, despite our checks, something appears which is not right, I think then the admission of the mistake becomes a kind of post-publication fact-checking. And if we find out that something is wrong, then we ought to be able to correct that very, very quickly. And I think that will win us friends. I think it will win us respect if we do that, certainly. The other questions that you raised, you said, I think probably I'm going to defer.
I would rather give the outreaching.
Yes.
Juliana is already raising her hand. I also thought
I agree.
to play that to you.
Yes, I'd love to say something about that. Thank you so much.
I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you have also a song displayed. No, yeah, now we can hear it.
But you can, okay, good. Thank God for that. So thank you for that question. It's a really excellent one. What is constructive journalism in this context? What can journalists do? What should they do? This is something that we think about quite a lot. And I think the following, I will go once again to the OECD and once again to Andreas Schleicher and tell you something that he has written multiple times, which I think is extremely striking. And he says, while 20th century learning was about the vertical transmission of facts from an older generation to a younger generation, 21st century learning is the act of, and I've written it down, really fascinating, the act of triangulating sources, evaluating the facts from those sources and building knowledge from that. That is 21st century learning. And if you think about it, that is what journalism does, right? We triangulate facts. we evaluate, or rather we triangulate the sources, we evaluate the facts, and from that we build the knowledge. And I would say that, you know, if you think of media as a public service, as I think the best journalists do, then the public service should expand from just being the news gathering to actually transmitting the skills of news gathering, so that children have an inbuilt sense that there are these 7 steps. They might not have the 7 steps always available, but they are aware that they themselves can do some of this, their own editing. It is a tall order, but it is actually something that can be done. We see the classrooms absolutely fascinated by this, because while we are, you know, we're biologically programmed not to like to be wrong. We don't want to be told we're wrong. This is one of the problems with fact checking, as important as it is. And I think fact checking has a tremendous role in its predictive possibilities and, you know, foreseeing trends of what is to come and actually bracing and protecting us in a preemptive way. But we're also programmed not to want to be hoodwinked. And so the response from the classrooms and from the children and from the teachers to basic tools is extremely enthusiastic. And I think what we need to do to really embed this, we also have to remember whatever we do is only as good as the political will to embed it and to keep it in there further. And we have to create political trophies, just like fact checking will create a wonderful headline, you know, under pressure from, I don't know, van der Leyen. Fact, you know, Facebook triples its, you know, adds 1,000 fact checkers and deletes 1 million posts. You know, the shares of van der Leyen goes up, the shares of Facebook goes up. Everybody thinks the problem's solved, but it isn't really. And so we need to actually create something equivalent. What is it that we can, you know, that policymakers and politicians can gain from higher levels of media literacy? And that's something that we really need to think about quite actively. And that's where I think impact analysis is important. In an ideal world, and I'll wrap up, I think in an ideal world, we would have a system whereby journalists are rotated and seconded into educational institutions, teacher training colleges and schools, long-term for a series of months, let's say, to really impart their knowledge slowly and gradually, and then to go circulate back into the newsroom and use everything that they've learned about their new audiences to really make their own content engaging and accessible.
A fully new role for journalists, basically. There is another question there, but while you're bringing the microphone there, Ramsey wanted to react immediately on that also.
Very briefly on Samra's very good question. We had Aidan White giving a talk for being journalist, and my last question for him was, what's your advice for them? And he said, slow down. Actually, we have to go back to what's professional journalism. Can be narrative, can be constructive, can be I don't know what, but has to be journalism. And Aidan said, journalism is not about free speech. Internet is the free speech. Journalism is contained speech. John mentioned the word el rigore from Spanish, contained by rules and deontology. So we need to defend our profession. Personally, I've been always against what used to be called citizen journalism. There is not such a thing as citizen journalism. When we got sick, we don't go to a citizen doctor, we go to a professional doctor. We have to defend our profession and full stop.
Citizen doctor is a good one to keep in mind, indeed.
So mine is not question, actually, it's more comment based on the things that was talking these days. Is first that beyond that being in the crisis of disinformation, we are crisis of the concept as well, how we understand the democracy and also integrity. And I think that in here we need a lot to talk in this philosophical way. I mean, to have in journalism also to discuss about this concept, maybe to rediscuss about this concept, and is a time that we most need this more philosophical approach to having this. But beyond that, I think it's very important to mention here also language that we are using. And it was mentioned before, but talking for gender equality, that is not that mentioned in this during the time in the panels, how we are actually talking for the gender violence and how we are talking for the gender equality. We know in the region we are activists, journalists who are talking about this, and just an example, when we are putting the hotlines, there is all the time the victim, the women, but not the perpetrator. And we need to have more feminist approach, editorial approach, and human rights approach. And I think that this is the the mission of the journalists in this period. So just this short comment.
Any reaction to that?
Just on your very first point about democracy, I think that's a very interesting point. Whether democracy itself needs modernizing, and I come at this from an Italian standpoint, in that Italy has given birth to the Five-Star Movement. Now, this is an organization that, well, it would actually deny that it is an organization which was born of the internet, but which has raised some very interesting questions about democracy. I think one of the things that older people do not understand is that the idea of only being able to make one choice every, let's say, 5 or 4 years, in a world in which you can do so many other things with the click of a mouse, is a very strange concept to younger people. And that we do need to look seriously at some of the ideas that that party or movement raised, and similar organizations in Germany and in Scandinavia have posed the same question. None of them really has had more than temporary success, but I think that they have raised some very valid questions about the extent to which we want to involve people in decision-making. And I think one of the reasons for the crisis in democracy globally is that people feel much less engaged than they would like to be.
There was one question there, the gentleman in the middle row, and further to the back afterwards.
Petri Saracini from IMA Institute from Skopje. I believe that all of us in the room would agree with this sentence that Ramsey quoted from Mr. Aidan White, that we need to slow down. We as a profession could agree, but what about the owners of the media? They force us to not to slow down, but to step up, and not to make one piece a day, but 3 to 5 pieces a day, in conditions when the salaries have been lowered down, in conditions when, for example, national TV stations in North Macedonia used to have 40 to 50 journalists in the newsroom. Now they have 10 to 15, and they need to do the same work, and not only the work that they used to do, but also put something on Facebook, on Twitter, make a short video, make a streaming. So they are holding a microphone, the camera with the other hand, etc. In these conditions, we cannot expect for this struggle to be the struggle about quality, but it's a struggle about survival. My question to the panel is, how do we make the owners and perhaps the state do something more about protection of the labor rights of journalists? Because at the end, this is from where it starts. If you have good conditions to work, maybe you would be doing your job better. And we are not seeing efforts in this direction. And I think that when you have people working journalism that are struggling to survive and not to advance in their profession, at the end of the day, you get the quality of the content that you have, and you have ties and links with the owner and with politics, etc., etc. And this is, I think, one of the things that is damaging the profession and its capacity to counter disinformation. Thank you.
In its capacity, certainly, and also on the individual level, which drives many of us towards cynicism. Well, if that's what they want, we hammer out 5 stories a day. But Milica, you.
Well, I just wanted to say to this what I think we should all keep repeating, and us also not coming from the media, not being journalists. if the public interest journalism is a public good, then it needs public support. And I think that we should be insisting on public support and public funding because there is no other way to protect public interest journalism. And we will be, if we continue without that, we will be left with social media and, you know, showbiz entertainment news that can generate profit to fund the salaries of those that are writing.
Thank you very much. A last question, because we have reached the end of this session.
Helena Ibrahimbegovic, I come from Sarajevo. I would just like to make a statement or comment about the fact that you have mentioned about the Italian Prime Minister, that he said untruths during the press conference. Us in Bosnia and all of our colleagues in the region as well, we have many press conferences of politicians every day, and we face those things daily. And sometimes we have press conferences at the same time from different politicians. And I do agree that we have to check what they're saying. But for example, at the top of our country, one of our top leaders is always calling Bosniaks Muslims. And we know that's wrong, but he's doing that on a daily basis, actually. And as a colleague have mentioned, we have less and less journalists and more things to do, more work. So how to cope with that? We all know that he's saying things that are wrong, all of them, basically, especially in Bosnia. It's kind of, you know, interesting situation in my country, but to like make comments in every text, that would be like, we would need at least 15 people just to do that, nothing else, just to like check what they're saying. Thank you.
Ramzi, Milica, maybe both you, because it's from the region here, but it's difficult if you're not practitioner, you as a journalist.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this comes back to the same issue raised by the earlier questioner, which is a financial one. You know, how do we get people to pay for journalism? Now, Milica talked about public funding, and I think that does have a role to play, but public funding can be a double-edged sword because it can bring with it political control. I think it feeds into another discourse, which is about how we get people to value that information and be willing to pay for it, which I realize is a damn sight more difficult in the Western Balkans than it is in, for example, the United States. What I would say is that in a number of areas, the owners of newspapers or the managers of newspapers have been exploring different models and have come up with quite successful answers to the question that we never imagined at the depth of the journalistic industrial crisis around about 10 years ago. What we've found is that, for example, The Guardian is a case where they've been able to stimulate voluntary contributions by their readers, because the readers have come to value both the approach of the newspaper, but also the quality of the journalism involved. But I'm not denying that the crisis exists, and the problems that you talk about are also felt in rich journalistic organizations like my own, where, again, we are under constant pressure to get stuff up quickly, and that inevitably means that from time to time it goes through with less filtering.
Thank you very much. We're just cutting down your coffee break, but Tiana convinced me for a short question.
Very short question.
Short answer.
Julian mentioned something called resistance or resilience to polarization, and I'm interested to hear what that is, because this is polarization has been mentioned, I think, in every panel that we had, and I'm always wondering, like, where's the line between stopping polarization and allowing like differences of opinions and ideologies that you're bound to have in a democratic society. So what does resilience to polarization looks like? What does that look like?
Again, I would like to turn to Milica or Ramsey, this time more. Yeah, Juliana.
Yes, I can say something briefly about that. So resilience to polarization is probably something very unattractive if you ask somebody like Berlusconi, and it is that rediscovering the curiosity for the messy middle. And this is what we try to do in our classroom visits, to really sensitize children to the fact that, you know, there is more to be discovered when you leave your poles, when you leave your rigid opinions and actually go and seek out some facts. And the facts in the middle are often far more intriguing and complicated than you imagine. But I have to say that, you know, resilience to polarization is really also going to rest with something that Milica brought up, which is the regulation that's coming out of Brussels, and that is the preference algorithms. You know, we are being made into polarized people. I probably am as well, because I only get one type of news, or at least not as varied a kind of news as I might have done in the past. And that is really the answer, is that we've got to break out of these algorithms, and we've got to call the large online platforms to account to change those algorithms. They can, we know they can, and we just have to make sure that they do, so that we can look out of our little silos and find our way back to one another.
Juliana, thank you very much, and which points also to a follow-up debate, which we could have perhaps another moment on algorithm literacy, actually. But I would like to conclude this debate here. Please give a very warm, short applause to our excellent speakers. And thank you very much for the questions. There's one logistical detail I have to say, which is, if you haven't done so yet, sign the list for your presence today, and we see us back in now 22 minutes at 11:30 for the next round. Thank you very much.
Hola. Does that mean?
Добре.
I love this line of the doctor. Before I was well.
question mark. Anyway, okay, I'll just kick off. I would say a very warm welcome to this fourth and last panel just before a very, very, very important logistical announcement for all those who have a plane leaving between 3 and 4. There is transport waiting already outside. There are 2 buses bringing you to the airport, and there are already lunch packets in the bus. So you don't need to worry if you will manage to eat something before you get out of here. And we also will aim to conclude this panel by 12:25, 12:30, in order just to take the urgency out of it, which means that you are able to first listen to this entire debate, and second, still eat something, and third, still be able to get your plane for those who are traveling. Anyway, this fifth and last panel is about collaborative approaches as a key, I'm reading the full title out, as a key to increase sustainability of independent media and its improved quality. And I very much like how the end of the previous debate all very naturally already pointed to this one, because the question that was raised in several questions, or the subtext of several questions, was, of course, like, to what extent, if we journalists are fighting for survival as journalists, at least as media, to what extent it can be expected of us to save the world. So this panel is rather about, well, how to save the media first in order to make them able to save the world. I'm using very, very big sentences now to make it more interesting, because I know everybody is tired by now. And so anyway, to save human resources and build reciprocally on respective strengths, independent media outlets could really, really, really benefit from cooperation networks for putting together, for example, this has already been mentioned in previous debates, fact-checking capacities, but also, and that's another point which is often overlooked, very practical and down-to-earth things like IT services, bookkeeping, because you can't run a company today without high-quality IT services and bookkeeping, of course, but this stuff costs money, and small outlets, of course, don't always have it. Hence the idea, can this stuff be changed too? That's another point we'll be speaking about today. And there is basically behind this idea, cooperate or disappear or be captured by local authorities. Let me quickly introduce the speakers. Svetlana Kojankovic from the Common Voice for Media Freedom from Serbia. We have Christina Lee, Tina, from Hostwriter, but also the editor-in-chief of a website called Unbiased the News. We have Slobodan Golubovic from the Association Center for Media Development, and I checked all the names, I trained them, but my brain doesn't function anymore. From the Association Center for Media Development in Ana Andrzej, and also the online magazine Journal from Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we have Anna Petrusheva, the country director of Bern from North Macedonia. Now, I would say we start the same way we did in the previous panels, which is not formal sort of opening statements, but I give you the word for a bit of introduction, what you're doing, what your activities and your projects, how they are connected to what we're debating here. And now, Svetlana, collaborative approaches seem to already be in the name, the Common Voice.
Yes.
So could you develop a bit?
Well, I'm very glad to see all of you, and I'm really glad that I have a chance to say something about our experience. And I have noted some important topics last night, because I think that we have to speak as fast as we can today.
Well, don't
Well,
speak too fast. Let's
as-
rather let's do it a normal debate. We
Yeah.
speak at our normal speed, because otherwise we're just like running
I
crazy.
think not now.
We will not make you
Well,
able to mention everything.
Nobody wants to leave the plane. Well, media reforms in Serbia have been going on for 15 years. The more we try to reduce the chaos in this segment of society, the greater it becomes. The more we try to increase media pluralism, the less it is. The more we fight for the public interest in the sphere of information, the less it is too. And the more we point out the need for citizens to be in the center of attention, the greater media representation of the executive power. My impression is that is more difficult now than in the 90s. And believe me, I remember the time very well. And here is why. Pressure are daily, especially in local areas. And not only from politicians, but also from economic corporations that deal with corruption, as well as from regime media, because they see us like enemy. In economic sense, local media are in more difficult position, I mean, than mainstream media. There is more and more work. I can remind you on COVID period, for example, and less employees. So it is not uncommon that the newsrooms have only 1 or 2 journalists to work. I will not speak about co-financing or media projects for public finances. I believe that all of you know about that and the problem without that. But finally, very important, the quality of media content is declining and the pluralism of media content is almost neglected. So what have we done? We believe that traditional media, civil society media and citizens can defend the front of media freedom and media pluralism through joint activities. So we founded an informal coalition named Common Voice for Media Freedom and try to do together. What have we done? We produced more than 200 media content and published on all media platforms together. When I say all media platforms, I mean web portals, radio, TV station, and weekly newspaper, as well as more than 20 networks. Sorry, I vlogged. So later I will speak about our result, but it was a pilot project. We didn't have any experience, but we knew that alone we can't do anything and that we have to find new models to work together to improve public information, to improve our contents, and to improve our, of course, newsrooms. It is very important for us. Well, it's it for beginning.
Svetlana, thank you so much. Anna, when we have been talking before this session, we haven't talked so much about sharing like practical things, but about common standards. Could you develop a bit? And there should have been a micro on their side. Okay.
Okay, so yeah. Okay, so I'm coming obviously from the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network, and this is a network that kind of started small from what we then recognized as a genuine need, because, you know, similar societies, similar problems, operating in an atmosphere where, you know, you see that there are no borders for organized crime and corruption and other things we are reporting on.
And for information.
Exactly. So we sort of thought that we should do this organization and that will sort of marry international standards with local knowledge. And we thought, that was sort of our guiding principle, that this would be a winning combination of sorts. And in that sense, that's been going on since 2004, 2005. So almost 20 years. But what we've done in the meantime is that we've made sure that we have standards that go across, and always what was most important for us have been, professional standards. And in this current context and in this current situation, and we were talking a lot about how throughout this conference, how, distribution channels for media are now sort of under question with the social media taking over. That has been the thing that distinguishes you as a niche quality product. And it also, I think, as well, in a situation where audiences in each society or local media have been giving a much more limited picture, and it never goes beyond borders. It is far better to offer, to offer the broader picture, the broader context, see how things are handled in different countries. And especially when it comes to investigative journalism, it's very important. And we've discovered that, what's been going on in the Balkans has not been unique, of course, in the Balkans as well. And we have expanded to Central Europe as well. And I'll just give you one example. For instance, we've been investigating the entry of various Hungarian companies in the taking over Macedonian media. And because we've had, relationships, and we've been working with journalists in Hungary, it's been, much easier to do a proper investigation that then has an impact in both countries, if you will. So in that sense, I think that what is the most important is quality journalism and abiding to high international standards, because that is what makes the difference. And if you want to look at, for instance, what's been revolutionary, as in projects that the ICIJ has been handling, as Pandora Papers, Panama Papers, and so on. What is the common thread there? That you have a collaboration of highly professional media. You don't have tabloids, you don't have, kind of dodgy ownership media, but you have media which have made a commitment, an agreement that they will use the same methodology, the same professional standards to do a product that, audiences can trust.
Yes, and very clearly also an admission that even high quality, even quite well-funded, comparatively high-funded, well-funded quality media of Western countries are not always able to have the resources necessary to, for example, the investigations to carry them out themselves. You should see how, like, The Guardian, Der Spiegel, Le Monde are working on these projects together. Sometimes the task is just too enormous to do this at one single media. So this is for very big companies teaming up, and this is of course more true for smaller ones. But I would, staying in the region, just a little bit smaller, global, than you are very much cooperating between Serbia and Montenegro, of course.
We have cooperative in Bosnia primarily. Our association, Center for Media Development and Analysis, is the founder of online magazine Journal, the first anti-corruption magazine in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Pratimo Tendere portal. On English, we follow tenders. The first portal who monitoring risks in public procurement. we have a lot experience in cooperation with our partners in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in the Western Balkans, primarily Serbia and Montenegro. We have about 10 years experience in networking with small and medium-sized media. Now we are implementing investigative journalism program who support 13 non-profit media in Bosnia and Herzegovina. That is a program supported by USAID. The media have support for production and have support for have legal support in cases of defamation lawsuit.
Very important point, the legal support also.
Our online magazine journal is the leader of this network. And many of our partners media is there today. There are numerous journalistic awards that have been given to journalists from Journal magazine and our partner media. We witnessed one such award yesterday. With support of BIMAP Forward, we founder of umbrella non-profit media organization as need this 13 media. Umbrella will represent a kind of media hub with the aim of helping small and medium-sized media in their umbrella is a research center for that media.
Congratulations for the award and
thank you.
Keep up the good job. Tina, when I heard about Hostwriter and went on your website and spoke to you, I thought, how could independent journalism have ever existed without such an organization? Tell us a bit about it. I think you have a presentation, right?
I decided to not.
Okay.
I'll just tell you guys about it. Yeah, thank you guys so much for inviting me to Tirana. Our organization, Hostwriter, is open for all journalists to join. And it was founded on the principle that there's a lot of inequality in journalism right now. One of the biggest forms of inequality, I'm sure all of you, we've been talking about these financial pressures, is that bigger organizations, big media outlets, they can afford to send people abroad